I owe everyone a video for our next set of papers. This is paper 5. And so I'm going to jam out 3 quick videos, probably be a little shorter than usual. Hopefully these help for the papers. I think they do, but obviously you guys have my notes and stuff already. Get my face out of there. And so this first one is going to be about Frederick Douglass. And what's interesting about this reading, I think, is that it definitely builds. The next two thinkers are definitely, responding to Frederick Douglass, who they both were, very highly influenced by. So he's like, one of these probably, if anything, understudied American figures, being Frederick Douglass. So our prompt for paper 5 is, what problems do African Americans face in terms of their identity and place in American culture, according to Du Bois, right? So this isn't a a generalized prompt. Like, again, the Du Bois reading has a specific answer to this. So make sure you're using the book in the reading, not like your particular impression of it, something cultural. Explain your answer using relevant text. To what extent would Washington disagree with Du Bois' assessment? So they are responding or building from Frederick Douglass, and I think there's themes to pay attention to in the Douglass, even though we're doing like a very brief reading, that they're both building from. And I think a lot of these arguments are still echoed today, and this is 100 plus years since these discussions. So the brief selection, again, you can tell these notes are a little bit older because I actually have some like kind of preamble to them. They're not kind of the first set of notes because of COVID that I got out that are just kind of like quotations or overview. So for the Frederick Douglass, which again, everything should be accessible on Canvas. We have to what of the slave to what to a slave is the 4th of July from 1852. So this is prior to the beginning of the Civil War, right? So this is the antebellum America. And I think what's interesting here is, again, I think the works in class build upon themselves, and what builds upon here is this kind of American idea of not the American idea, but the idea of the social contract that we've read. And then again, we just got done reading kind of these foundational American thinkers, and then de Tocqueville, where it's kind of like a both good and bad kind of diagnosis of an American culture they saw from the 1830s. Right, so it's not all kind of like why America's great. De Tocqueville's kind of saying like, here's some good things, here's some bad things, here's some things that are bad in Europe that I think work, here's some good things in America I think work, so on and so forth. So I have here, one of the things that stuck out to me about this reading is that one can see the direct influence of Douglass had on the subsequent generations of thinkers like Booker T. Washington, Du Bois, right? So Washington was also a slave. Du Bois was fortunate not to be born into slavery. Douglass provides both a critique of the United States that is positive and at the same time scathingly critical, so not too dissimilar from de Tocqueville. He does this by praising the bravery of the American revolutionary spirit and demonstrating how it is bitterly failing in his contemporary era. And again, if you guys are very passionate about this stuff, like maybe it still is. Or maybe we need a whole revolution. I think others of you in class kind of go that route or think that's the kind of appropriate response to kind of these injustices that occur. In short, he is making plain the hypocrisy present in the American political culture of the day. Douglass, I already kind of said that. Douglass acknowledges relatively young age of the U.S. as a country. He thinks this entails hope for change and reform that he also holds must occur in order to bring about justice that will impact the broader society, so in particular African Americans. So he's drawing on, again, this kind of revolutionary thing in the reading, this kind of revolutionary story. In many ways, the American culture is made up, meaning like Americans have made it up. This is an aside. I think it's relevant. I think it's useful for the video. I was talking to my friend Hector, who's a professor. He's also from Mexico. And we're kind of talking about American culture in the abstract. I think you guys know at this point, like, I like America. And so from a foreign citizen, he was kind of like, well, why does America behave a certain way? And I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. I think this is a fair observation from a historical context. And so what I told him is like what's different, and what oftentimes commenters or certain historians will say is like, the kind of American history and background is actively kind of shaped in a sense that's maybe different than, say, like the years and generations of like events and wars and storytelling that other cultures have, right? It's like, say the Chinese culture is like, one of the oldest cultures in the world, like continuous civilizations. And I was saying with regards to the Mexican context, like if you look at the Mexican flag, right, it represents part of like this Mexican identity or Mexican story, right? So there's an eagle on a cactus eating a snake, and it goes to the story of the Aztecs were kind of like the dominant culture when Cortez encountered the Mesoamericans, and that's reflected in Mexican identity that like this is like this kind of promised land, that this was the symbol, and it stuck with them. And again, like not everyone was an Aztec, but that's reflected in their on their flag, right? America doesn't have that. America doesn't have thousands of years of this kind of shared culture. Obviously, there are people here before the Europeans. And so in some sense, the Americans kind of like have made these things. And so when you go to Washington, D.C., and you look at the Capitol Rotunda, I believe, you see depictions of, say, George Washington is almost like a saint-like figure, right? So it's kind of religious imagery. And so why do you see that? Because the Americans are just literally drawing on the founders to kind of have this presentation. And so that's this kind of like point that Douglas is making and tie back into the readings is that, yeah, we're a young country. And the way we think about things and the norms we have, like maybe can be more easily shaped than, say, thousands of years of like cultural values and things like that. In hindsight, it's easy to view the American Revolution as correct, necessary, and proper. This is from Douglas. It seems this is also the case with ending slavery, despite being highly controversial at the time and leading to a civil war. History obviously proved Douglas correct. And so he's kind of using this point about like the novelty of change, the importance of revolution, that most people around the world would have thought the Americans were crazy, but yet they did it anyways. And it seems like, the American project has done some good, right? Like we'd all be speaking German now if there was no America. Like basically we would not have won World War II. And so this is what Douglas is trying to use that argument to tie to, well, this is why we need to have abolition. So we need to get rid of slavery, right? It might seem ridiculous to Southern plantation owners now, but history is different. It's a fight worth fighting. The madness, of course, we believe is admitted now, even by England talking about the American Revolution. But we, meaning abolitionists, fear the lesson is wholly lost on our present, right? So like Americans have missed, especially white Americans have missed this point that, yeah, your views and your beliefs and your desire for independence and freedom were also viewed as crazy. So it's not, you should not look at us as being crazy, and us not just meaning black Americans, although obviously they had most of the concern, right? It was also the white abolitionists as well. Like this is not a crazy way of pursuing social change. And again, these are, I think, themes that have been echoed in class in various capacities by various students too, right? It might seem crazy to kind of advocate this now, but once we get there, like, is it? I think this is kind of the tension with like the American revolutionary talker or presenters that we read, and then maybe like other types of revolutionaries that we've read. Such people lived then and have lived before and will probably ever have a place on this planet. They hate all change but silver, gold, and copper change, right? So again, this kind of class thing, and you can see how some of these thinkers get tied into like these really great economic points. We're not just making political points. Yeah, so maybe at the end of the day, it's just power, but maybe power reflected here is like essentially economics and money. So why don't people don't want change? Because they're going to lose money. There are vested interests in how the status quo is. The U.S. was a much weaker position and still decided to fight regarding the revolution. So Douglas is drawing an allusion to black Americans and other abolitionists of his time, right? So just because you're in this weaker position, not inferior, weaker, like power-wise speaking, that doesn't mean it's not a fight worth fighting for. George Washington freed his slaves, yet Washington's monument was built by slaves. So these are kind of like these kind of things that Douglas is pointing out. America used its gained freedom to then enslave others. So this is why Douglas mourns the 4th of July. So again, I think this is kind of idea of the celebration of this kind of social contract. The 4th of July is America forming its own country, and yet it's not living up to the values even then that it's espousing that it has, like freedom of people, right? And it says it seems strange to celebrate while black Americans are not freed, right? So again, remember this is before the Emancipation Proclamation and things like that. The hypocrisy of the U.S. is rampant for Douglas. Americans are not following the Constitution and the Bible. So again, this kind of speaks of those kind of norms and things I was talking about that inform, say, political ideology and political dialogue. Documents they would have otherwise say they champion. Douglas notes that even slave owners and thus the institutions of slavery itself, in actuality, acknowledge the humanity of enslaved people. I thought this was a fantastic argument. I thought it was well reasoned. It made a lot of sense. Right? They do so when they make prohibitions through laws that deny blacks the ability to learn how to read and write. Right? Such laws, Douglas astutely points out, need not be or have ever been established against creatures, meaning actual non-human animals. Douglas spends some time in our reading explaining then why it is ridiculous to have to prove the claim that blacks are people. So again, if you don't understand why I think that's so like amazing, we could talk about that more in class. But he's basically saying like, there are some things that are so obvious that humans don't make laws against it, right? So, the fact that a horse can't own a gun, you can only make those laws if someone are people. So even if I sit there as a white landowner, slave owner, and go, these group of people, black people in this case, are not people, like by making laws against their ability to learn and move around freely, it makes no damn sense, right? And so that's, I don't know, that's like a powerful argument. When you encounter those in philosophical terms, like you just kind of, wow, you kind of put it in the back of your head. Another example of American hypocrisy was the decrying of the foreign slave trade while not addressing the domestic institution of slavery, right? We know that this represents a kind of compromise that there actually were abolitionists prior to the formation of the United States. And so this is one of those ways, like in order to form a country, they're kind of like, we're going to ban foreign slave trade, like the importation of slaves. But you can still have domestic slavery. And one of the reasons that this compromise was attained is because abolitionists like John Adams at the foundation of the country thought the institution would just die out. And I think, again, with all the different things we've discussed about equality, about economics, about what it is to be a human, what's human nature like, that this is one of these things that the people who were against slavery just got wrong, right? That human nature will not recognize the things that, human nature generally will not recognize the things that Douglas is pointing out. And we know historically that slavery did not die out. That if anything, it became more brutal as foreign slaves trade was decreased, and this again led to the Civil War. So again, this is just an overview. These videos are just overviews. These notes are just overviews. They're kind of meant to help you. Again, this isn't a big component of our paper, but I don't think you can understand what the paper is asking you if you haven't read this particular reading. So I think this is pretty much a shorter thing. I haven't recorded in a while. Hopefully this sounds good. I'm going to upload these and hopefully use these again in the future if we have class online because of COVID or other circumstances. Have questions, participate in class, and do the readings. So I'll see you guys in the next video on Booker T. Washington.